All right, well, good Thursday afternoon to everyone. I'm Tony Bergantino, Director of the Wyoming State Climate Office and the Water Resources Data System. And we're glad to have all of you with us for this Conditions and Outlooks webinar, which is presented by my office along with the Bureau of Reclamation, the Wyoming State Engineer's Office, Bureau of Land Management, the National Weather Service, the USDA Northern Plains Climate Hub and University of Wyoming Extension, and the US Geological Survey. And on behalf of all of them and myself, I'd like to thank you for joining us. And as we look at the current drought and flooding and climate conditions, reservoir operations, water administration, weather forecasts and outlooks, including some fire potential. And there's a lot to cover, but at the end, if there is still some time left, we might briefly look at some ways that you can help report what you're experiencing. So start off with current conditions. We have the newly released, as of this morning, drought monitor map. Like last time, before I get into this, the link highlighted here in yellow is about a 2.5-minute long video that explains some of how the map is created. And if you haven't watched that yet, you might want to give it a quick view at some point. Well, you can see a little bit of a pattern on this map. We'll start with the red, which indicates a category of one or more categories of degradation since the last webinar. And we're seeing a few areas down here, mostly in the southern sort of west central part of the state. These areas did not see any of the, or as much of the precipitation that we saw through the last part of the last 30 days since the last webinar. This was either going to be the hardest or easiest change map to draw for these webinars. I went with the easy version this month, and looking at the area in green is an area that has improved. Now within that area, there were multiple categories of improvements. It was not just across the board, one category here or two categories across the board. There were some areas that went from D3 up here in the northwest to D0. Other areas also jumped one category as an improvement. Now this will change. All right, this is the 14-day precipitation percentile. This goes from the 2nd of June through the 15th. And you can see some areas of above median here in the northwest, especially, as well as quite a bit here over in the northeast. But below median, quite a bit of the rest of the state, with some areas of concerns here in the southeast, especially northern Albany County, where we're getting some pretty low precipitation percentiles, and also down into Laramie County. Bighorns, some of the Bighorn Basin, as well as Fremont County and the winds. And too much of a good thing can be a bad thing. So we have some above median areas that are also areas of concerns here in the northwest, which we will get into in a little bit more, but just to include that on the slide here. Looking at the same at 90 days, we see again above median precipitation across much of the north down into Fremont County, some of Natrona County, but then also looking at below median in southern Lincoln, the western side of the winds, and then down here in the southeast. And again, a lot of this precipitation that we're seeing up here is being pushed back just from recent events. So we're seeing that precipitation show up in averages that are running several months in duration. This is the standardized precipitation and evapotranspiration index, or the SPEI, since that's quite a mouthful. This is an index that is made up of precipitation and evapotranspiration data, and it gives a sense not just of the water coming into the system by precipitation, but it also shows where we're losing moisture into the atmosphere through evaporation. And since it's an index, the values on here are just between -2 on the low side and a little bit over 2 on the high side. So if the value is negative, it's dry, and if it's positive, it's on the wet side. And what we're seeing here is quite a bit of blue or wet areas, especially in the northwest again, going back into 60 days, and that actually continues back into some of the earlier ones as well. It disappears by the time you're looking at the year down here in the lower right. On the dry side, we can see at the 1 year time frame, Laramie County here is one of the main areas of concern. But as you look at the 60 and 30, as we go counterclockwise here, you can see that level of dryness decreases as we continue through. And as we jump to the next slide here, really slow up here. We'll look at the 14-day average minimum temperature. Lows are still a little bit below 32, below freezing here at the high elevations here, especially in the west, but also up in the Bighorns. We're seeing upper 40s and all across the lower elevations of the north and into the east. Looking down here in the lower left as a departure from normal, we're seeing minimum temperatures plus or minus 3 degrees Fahrenheit statewide, with a few areas down here, a little bit in Albany, some over here in Uinta, Lincoln, and then up into Platte and Goshen, where we were seeing 6 degrees above average, but fairly scattered across the state as far as departure on the minimum side. And as we look at the maximum side, eventually, well, I don't know if we're going to see the maximum here. It looks like we are locked. All right, we're unlocked. Looking at average maximum temperatures across the state for that same period, we're looking at above 30s statewide, in fact, above mid 30s for the most part. Low to mid 50 or 70s down here in the southeast, but the higher elevations and up into the northwest corner, down into the 40s. Looking at that as a departure from normal, we see a kind of a dividing line across the state, with the northern part 0 to 6 below average, with the lowest up here in the higher elevations of the northwest, as you'd expect, and then in the south above average, mostly by 0 to 3 degrees, but some portions of the southeast 3 to 6 degrees above average, especially in Albany, Laramie, and then southern Goshen and Platte counties. Now we'll see if we can go forward here. Or not. All right, getting into the situation I mentioned where too much of a good thing can be bad, let's kind of take a look at events up in the northwest part of the state. And the basins as a whole saw below normal snowpack this year. And in fact, one basin, the upper Yellowstone, which is mostly in Montana, but does have a little finger in Wyoming, saw a record low snowpack during February, March, and the first half of April of this year. But some sites such as this one here, Parker Peak Snowtail, did get up to and actually exceeded median snowpack. And as you can see on the black line here, which is the trace for this year, the meltout began quite a bit later than it normally does. So what you're looking at is you have date for a given date, you will have snow water equivalent that's much higher than you would normally have on that date. And as you can see here, we're extending quite a ways over the ledge here. And as we look now, we can look at this as an aerial view. Again, eventually. Some real slow connection here.
Tony, I'll just jump in real quick. If you would like me to try to share the slide deck on my end, feel free to let me know, and I'm happy to do that and see if it.
Yeah, go ahead and see if that's what's. Let me stop here.
Okay. One moment, folks. Apologies for the technical issues. All right. Hopefully you can see my screen now, and if so, Tony, feel free to go ahead and continue on.
All right, now this is the aerial view of what we were looking at, and this just shows the extent that there was still existing snow water equivalent in the pack. Can't quite see that on June 12th. We go to the next slide. This is just showing the snowpack temperature. With the warmer temperatures that we've been having and the melt starting, snowpack temperatures were just at or slightly below freezing. So the pack was ripe and ready to go. I want to move to the next. Although we did see about 1.5 inches or so of precip in the northeast, the big story is still this area over here in the northwest. Corner which saw 2.5 to more than 4 inches in some places over this 4-day period, ending basically around 5 a.m. on June 14th. And keep in mind that these rain totals, as we go forward and look at these next slides, these are some pretty substantial totals for a 3-day period. So if you go to the next. And this is just going to be a series of snapshots, one for each day, showing the amount of snow water equivalent that was melting off on each of those days from the 11th through the 13th of June. And okay, go to the next. We're seeing about 2 inches of water coming off. A little bit less on the 12th. And then by the time we get to the 13th, it's still coming off about 1.5 inches or so. But that's in addition to the precipitation that's falling at the same time. And so with that much water introduced to the system over a real short period of time, the stream flows naturally went up tremendously. So we'll look at 2 specific gauges. One is in Yellowstone National Park, just above Gardner, Montana. That's the one, the Lamar station. And then we'll also look at the one just downstream of Gardner, which is the Yellowstone River at Corwin Springs. And we'll just take a look at a couple series of charts showing the flow and how it progressed. To go to the next, which will be the Lamar station. All right, what we're seeing here is these are daily mean flows from about 1923 onward. There's a gap of time there in the 70s and such where there was no record, but you can see that last value there was on June 13th and exceeds every other peak that we had, including the 96-97 event and also the 2010 or 2011 that we were seeing. In between those and some of the earlier ones that were also notable floods. So this was a record daily, mean daily flow. But let's look at this in terms of a 3-day average flow. And you see it's still well up there. The 96, 97 floods were a bit higher when you consider the amount of water going through there in a 3-day period, but it's still ranked as the 3rd highest over a 3-day period. And if we go to the next slide, we'll look at it in terms of a 5-day, and we're seeing that we're still ranked as the 6th highest, just barely beating out the one back in, I believe it was 1925. Now let's look at the station that was downstream of Gardner. And that's that one that's circled in red there. And if you go to the next. Okay, this one as a single day discharge greatly exceeded anything that was in the past. You see the 96, 97 one showing up there, as well as the 2011 event, which 2011 was actually record snowpack for most of the stations up there. But this exceeds even the ones back in the teens, where we had a very substantial flooding event through there at the time. Again, this is the average daily flow in CFS, or cubic feet per second. And so let's go to the next one and look at it like we did last time with a 3-day average discharge. And we're seeing that it didn't quite make a record, but it's pretty close on the 3-day average compared to that one way back. This station actually starts in 1910. So we have about 13 years more record than the Lamar station. But you can see we're really close to that peak, even with a 3-day. And so if we can go one more, and this is with 5-day average, and we see we're ranked as the 5th largest discharge since 1910. So a lot of water going through there, and really fast. And one of the things to note was the change in the levels going from the day before to that peak date. It was one of the largest, and I think that one did set records all across as far as how much it went up in one single day's worth of flow. So if you want to move to the next one, soil moisture. You can see even 2 weeks ago we were about 60 to 70 percentile up there in the Northwest, and it did get a little bit worse in the weeks in between that and the 15th. But now, as you look at it, we're seeing soil moisture percentile in that corner there that we haven't seen in a long time, since before actually this drought started, especially that 80th to 90th percentile that we're seeing there. And as a result of the precipitation that we did get over that 3-day period, and some others in the Northeast, we're also seeing some really nice percentiles over there as well. It's a different story in the southern part of the state, where we are getting worse. As you can see, it expanded a fair amount in terms of the percentile from the 2nd of June to the 15th, and a major expansion, or actually introduction and expansion, of that 0th to 2nd percentile there across Sweetwater, Carbon, Albany, and then going up into Platte and Laramie counties. So while we're doing well in terms of soil moisture, almost a little too well in some places, we are having issues down in the south, and so we're going to have to continue to keep an eye on that southern part of the state. So if you want to go to the next, this is the drought timeline, and this is showing from 2000 through current. A major decrease in the amount of D category, the D1 actual drought, D1 to D4, almost 28% decrease from the last webinar, and it's very good to see. You want to go to the next one? And this is a zoom in on the previous timeline, showing conditions from the start of 2020 to the present. And we have some areas now where there's no drought category, which finally ended about a 38-week run where the entire state had some D category designation. I would point out that we're now still at 100 weeks with some part of the state in D3, though we are down to only about 4.5% of the state having that D3 category in it. So improvements are taking place, at least. If you want to move to the next. All right, USGS personnel are very actively involved in the situation in Yellowstone and Montana, so I'll continue to go through with their section. We're just showing here that stream flows are right about normal, or even exceeding normal up there in the Northwest, but in the southern part of the state, same type of story. We're seeing below normal stations in a few locations. Not a lot of them, but peppered across that southern tier there. If you want to go into the next one, we'll take a look at a few of these. This is that Lamar River station that we saw the first set of graphs for. And as you can see also on this, just looking at the yearly hydrograph, you can see that we broke through the record there up at the top, and we were in uncharted area there for a little while. To go to the next, which should be the Shoshone station. at Wapiti. And again here, also up in that corner, we did break through and we did see record flows for that station as well, just a few days ago on the 13th. Let's go around a little bit other parts of the state, not quite as high, but still up there into the 76th to 90th percentile. We have the Bighorn River at Kane. Looks like it may have peaked, may see a little bit more of a bump up on that, but we're nearing the top of the hydrograph for that station. And if we move over to the Powder, this one's right about normal. We did have a bump up there around the beginning of June where we did get into about the 95th percentile very briefly, and then came back down. The only real excitement on that chart down into the normal period right now, sort of in the middle. Next, now we're seeing some of the issues in the southern part of the state again. This is the Green River just below Fontanilla Reservoir. We're down in the 10th to 24th percentile. Never really did see much. We saw that little bump up latter third or so of May, and where it's hanging on from there, but not anywhere near the normal period on this one. And last one we'll take a look at is the reservoir storage and what's been happening here in the last month. All of the reservoirs have seen increased storage, some of them only by 1 or 2%. We did see decreases at Glendo by about 5%, I think it was, and then a little bit more at Flaming Gorge and Woodruff Narrows, but Palisades, Jackson Lake all came up considerably, as well as Buffalo Bill. Bighorn Lake is up near the top compared to where it was last month. So increase in reservoir levels almost across the board, except for 2 or 3 exceptions. And that would be it. We'll move on to Nikki Nielsen with the Bureau of Reclamation to talk about the reservoir conditions that I just started on.
Good afternoon. Get here. So this afternoon, I'm gonna share a little bit about our current reservoir conditions within the Bighorn and North Platte basins. We've had a few changes in conditions, especially up in the Bighorn Basin with the additional inflows that we've been having in the last couple of days. So once again, I'm going to start with the North Platte. The peach area there is the North Platte system on the Wyoming map. I'm going to buzz through this one pretty quickly just because the North Platte operations are going pretty much as expected per our operating plans. And our operating plans haven't changed a whole lot since April. The June forecast indicates that the spring snow runoff amount will be below average. The total April through July runoff in the North Platte Basin above Glendo is expected to be 545,000 acre feet, which is about 72% of the 30-year average. And that has not changed since the last couple months. So this forecast does include the 302,000 acre feet of runoff that has been accumulated above Glendo between April and May. So the total conservation storage capacity of the North Platte reservoir system is about approximately 2.8 million acre feet. And as of June 14th, the combined storage content in the North Platte reservoirs was about 1.8 million acre feet, which is about 90% of our 30-year average. Next slide. So here are the current operations for the North Platte system. Our current releases out of Seminole and Cordis are 1,500 cubic feet per second. And that's through the Miracle Mile. Releases out of Gray Reef Reservoir were increased on June 14th up to 2,500 CFS, and releases out of Glendo are currently 2,250 CFS And the releases out of Guernsey are variable based upon downstream requirements. Those are changing daily based upon what irrigation demands that we are receiving. Seminole is expected to peak at 1,500, and it's actually going to be shut off here pretty soon at the end of June, and it will go back down to the required minimum of 530 CFS. Gray Reef is expected to peak around 3,000 CFS at the end of this month. And then releases from Guernsey are expected to peak at about 4,600 CFS, and those are all fairly typical for this system. Next slide. Things have been a little more exciting in the Bighorn system in the past couple days. The Bighorn system is shown there in the light blue section. Yeah. So the cool, wet Memorial Day weekend brought a little bit more snow into the mountains. The delay in melt and the additional snow gain made a big difference in our forecast. Last month, we didn't expect Buffalo Bill to fill, and now we are expecting it to fill. So we are managing the rate of fill at both the Buffalo Bill and Basin reservoirs. And then the only reservoir not shown there is the Bighorn Lake. And as of June 1st, the Bighorn Lake is at 86% full. Releases and planned releases are pretty fluid right now as our reservoir outflows are reactive to the predicted inflow rates. As of June 14th, our system was 89% full, which is about 96% of average. Next slide. So here are our current water operations for the Bighorn Basin. The Buffalo Bill releases are at 4,500 CFS and Basin releases are at 3,000 CFS. And while we expect the outflows to remain over the weekend, we may be making some adjustments as our conditions change. So expect the flows to be pretty variable from now through the 4th of July because the reservoirs are nearing capacity. So for the most part, for the most up-to-date information on our water releases out of any of our reservoirs, you can go to that website there in red. So as soon as we send out our water orders to our operators to make those changes, those water orders are also updated there. And so you can get them almost instantaneously. Next slides. So with summer really getting started and people starting to make their vacation plans, we're getting lots and lots of calls right now about river flows and lake elevations. And while we're very happy to relay this information, I wanted to kind of get the word out that we do have a lot of this information available to the public on our website. The photo there on the left shows the Hydromet data system on the Bureau of Reclamation website. And from here, you can search for gauging stations, not just in Wyoming, but in all of the states that are managed by Reclamation. And most of these gauging stations, you can get up to the date information in about 15-minute intervals. You can also get on there and get some historical information and print off charts showing information over months or even years. So I just did a little example there on the right photo. It's just a graph of the releases from Glendo between May and June. And so you can see kind of where the peaks are and where we are right now. And so you can check, you know, when you're going out, if you want to check the elevations there. Some of the other parameters that you can kind of search through on there include reservoir storage, evaporation rates, forebay elevations, and daily inflow. So it's a pretty neat tool that's available, and I would highly recommend exploring. I was just exploring and found out that I can make those teacup models yesterday. So that was what was shown on my last slide. So yeah, so there's a lot of information, and otherwise we are always available for any questions. So that's all I have.
Great, thank you, Nikki. And next we have Jeff Cowley with the State Engineer's Office.
Hello, everybody. Glad to be here. Here's our initial slide giving you kind of the rundown of if you have questions in your corner of the state. Here is who to call, and we've got our division superintendents here on this first screen and relatively located next to their divisions. So next slide, please. In Division 1, we are currently still have the call for people who pump from the main stem of the river. And you can see here it's 6,600 acre feet limitation every 2 weeks. That's something Wyoming does internally, measures that and reports out. The second call is on Jack Creek, which is in District 6, which is above Seminole, give or take around Saratoga. And as you can see, it's a spring 1882 call. So it's a territorial right making that call. May 23rd call, we had a call on Bates Creek, which is District 11, which is give or take around Casper. And that's another territorial call, 1886. On June 2nd, we had a call on Bear Creek and Tribs in District 2, which is give or take Horse Creek, LaGrange type area in Southeast Wyoming. And again, that is a 1891 call. So that is just into a permit, but it's on Bear Creek. So it's a court decree. So never mind, we won't get into that right now. So next slide, please. Division 2, we have had a call, or still have a call on May 14th, Big Goose Creek, which is District 4, which is give or take right around Sheridan. And Dave Schroeder, our superintendent, reported that there is still some flooding near Sheridan and Buffalo going on right now with all that snow coming off the mountains. Next slide, please. And if you're a Goldilocks fan, this porridge is just right. Division 3 has received the right amount of moisture and the right amount of snow melt. There were a few calls last month. They, as you can see here, they have been suspended at this time because there is just the right amount of water coming down the rivers and creeks. Next slide, please. Division 4, this porridge is still too hot. We've got lots of calls going on here in Division 4. I don't know that I want to read through them all, but we have a call on North Piney Creek, the Central Bear, Fish Creek, Blacks Fork River, South Piney Creek, and Smith's Fork. Some of those are territorial right calls and some are permitted calls. So it's dry in Division 4, and you can see that here by the amount of calls we have in this division. I believe the last slide is just another chance for you to write a name and a phone number down. If you have questions in your corner of the state, these are the guys to call, and they're more than happy to help. They have staff that do this all the time, so they'll get you directed to who you need to talk to. Thanks, Wendy.
Great, thanks, Jeff. And with that, we will start to transition to forecasts and outlooks with Jared Allen of the National Weather Service office in Cheyenne. Jared?
Great, thanks, Wendy. Appreciate it. I'm Jared Allen, National Weather Service Cheyenne, and here looking at the next 7-day total precipitation forecast from today through the 23rd of June. Unfortunately, right there in the middle of the state, lower terrain and the higher plains, not looking at too much, not expected too much, maybe some trace amounts with some showers coming across tomorrow through the weekend. But the higher totals are going to be focused a little bit more in the Wind River range in the northwest part of the state, which is not super great news because they certainly have some higher flows and stream flows after the event of earlier this week. Further to the southeast, we'll take the rainfall that we can get because that area, as Tony mentioned, has been on the drier side. So anything we can get across Carbon, Albany into Laramie County, Goshen, Platte, that will be very beneficial. But unfortunately, it's not going to be a whole lot to overcome the D1 and the D2 drought that we have. So over on the right side are some really good weather talking points where we're certainly on the warm side right now. With a building large ridge of high pressure system over the Intermountain West and especially Wyoming right now through at least Saturday. And then we're going to have a slight cool down starting on Sunday, especially for the western part of the state. Still be warm on the eastern part of the state on Sunday. Again, those are the scattered showers and thunderstorms that we're going to be looking at Friday through Sunday across portions of the state, mainly focused in kind of the corners and up in the Bighorn areas. Once we go into Monday, looking at slightly below average temperatures behind a Pacific cool front that comes through. But then looks like we'll be warming up again going into mid next week and late next week. So we'll get a short reprieve Monday, partially into Tuesday, but mid next week warming up again. So if you want to go ahead to the next slide, that'd be great. Thank you. So looking at the 6 to 10 day temperature and precipitation outlook. So this is from June 21st through June 25th. we can see our little corner of the state for there in Wyoming. Generally favored across Wyoming to be above normal, especially favored slightly higher for central and east portions of the state. And then on the right side, looking unfortunately at equal chances or slightly below favored chances for lower than normal precipitation. Hopefully, fingers crossed, down there in the far southeast, we were able to get a little bit of some monsoonal surge that comes up from the desert southwest. But unfortunately, that may not be enough to alleviate certainly the ongoing drought conditions. So if you want to go to the next slide, we're going to shift our overall time frame from 6 to 10, now a little bit beyond that, 8 to 14. So we're going from June 23rd through June 29th. So almost trying to close out the end of the month, and kind of the same story again across the state, generally favored to be above normal across the entire state, with a little bit higher amounts further to the east. And essentially kind of the same story as well for precipitation outlook. Favored slightly drier for central and west, kind of a near normal precipitation in portions of the east, and then maybe the super far south and east going down towards Colorado and the Four Corners. A little bit more favored signal for above normal precipitation. But again, we're going to need a lot more in this corner of Wyoming for Cheyenne area, Laramie County, to try and start overcoming the drought that we have ongoing. So if we want to move to the next slide really quick, what does it look like for the next 3 months? So again, these are all out of the Climate Prediction Center, which is a national center for the National Weather Service. And unfortunately, not super great news here for the summer months. So we're looking at July, August, and into September, where again, these same colors are showing up again. So we are favored above normal temperatures across a vast majority, pretty much the country, but especially the state too, centered across Utah, Colorado, and into Wyoming. So south and southeast, southwest Wyoming favored a little bit more versus northeast Wyoming. But those temperatures, unfortunately, may contribute to some additional drought conditions. So speaking of the precipitation component, not super great news there, where based on the large scale patterns that are potentially shaping up through the summer months, we're looking at below average or favored below average precipitation, especially for central and northeast portions, favored a little bit better further to the south and west, where hopefully a greater monsoonal surge is able to infiltrate that direction. But unfortunately, any brown coloring and then very orange coloring on the left side doesn't spell too much of a good news for the potential drought. So while we've had some great alleviation here recently with the late season spring storms that we've had and some of the snow melt that's ongoing, we might have a return to some higher drought categories through the rest of the summer. So if we just want to go one additional slide. Here's just a quick recap of what occurred up in the far northwest part of the state in Yellowstone. So this is at Lamar River near Tower Falls. This is just a hydrograph on the left side, capturing the significant river rise that occurred, where the previous record was 12.1 feet. And you can see where it crested basically at essentially 16.8 feet. So almost 4.5 feet above the previous record. And unfortunately, that did cause a lot of significant damage up that way, from washed out roads, washed out culverts, damaged housing up that direction too, where there's a lot of cleanup effort going on at the moment. So you had the very heavy rains on the rich snowpack that occurred. All entrances at the moment are closed into Yellowstone. So if you have any plans on going up there, please be sure to check with the latest information going up that direction. And with that, I'll turn it over to Wendy for the next segment.
Great, thank you, Jared. And the next presenter is Joel Peters with BLM to talk about the wildfire outlook.
Thank you, Wendy. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Joel Peters. I'm a fire management specialist with the Wyoming Bureau of Land Management. So we'll kind of cover some fuels and wildland fire stuff here. So first chunk, for those that are kind of new to this, is we'll kind of cover some of what we're going to be looking at. So we're going to be looking at the energy release component which is one of the indices that we utilize to kind of see where we're at and as far as fire conditions are in the landscape. So that ERC is basically it's a heat per unit area measurement. So you know, how dry is it and how hot is it going to burn at the flaming head of that fire. So it's generally expressed as a percentile, which will be shown in the graphs coming up. And we also rely heavily on our 1,000-hour fuel moistures as well. They're just a very good correlation towards kind of drought over long-term periods of time, and you know where those fuels conditions are at moisture-wise out in the landscape. Next slide, please. So now we'll get into some actual energy release component measurements for these percentiles. These are based on, you can kind of see up in the left-hand corner, ERC-Y. Y is a timber fuel model. It does correlate still even with some of our basin locations that aren't specifically a timber model, so you can kind of not, you know, focus too heavily on that. But looking at the values currently over the state of Wyoming, much of the state is in pretty good conditions. We're below that 50th percentile, unless you start getting into that southeast portion of Wyoming. Some of those areas are in the 80th, and then down in the Medicine Bow Route National Forest, they're also getting into the, you know, above the 90th in certain places. And one kind of thing to think about too with these dots on the map, it's actually the remote automated weather station that's giving these numbers. So sometimes they can be in kind of a very location specific anomaly of whether it's a high or low value as well, something to kind of to think about there. So rest of the state, you know, is still quite green. We've gotten precip over numerous areas that are maintaining that greenness, which is definitely a good thing. Speaking in central Wyoming, where I'm from, definitely seen a lot of grass in places that we have not seen in several years due to the timing of the precip and the like. So next screen. So here I threw on the state of Colorado. Obviously that's not us, but I wanted to show it just to show kind of what kind of conditions they are in to our neighbors to the south, especially that southwestern corner of Colorado is really in that 97th or above for their energy release components right now. And so the big thing is, well, why are we concerned about Colorado's indices? So the big concern for Wyoming is, as we get out of post green up, our fine fuels begin to cure. We get some of this monsoonal moisture that was just talked about coming to the north, or coming, you know, into the north from the southwest. If it comes in a little bit drier than expected, it brings one thing with it, lightning. And so if our neighbors to the south are extremely dry and we're starting to dry out, we care because resource commitment and shortages are going to start coming into play when it comes to fire suppression. So that's one of the reasons why it pays to kind of watch our neighbors to see where they're at as well, and what kind of could be coming into the future for us as well. So the biggest thing they've had going for them lately is the lack of ignitions pertaining to lightning. And that may change here in the future as we get more into summer. So we'll see how that pans out. Next slide, please. So here's some energy release component charts we'll look at. As mentioned, some of that southeast corner, that Fort Laramie Cheyenne area, they're definitely climbing. You can really see that blue line shooting above where we'd like to be. That gray line is the average. We kind of hovered around there, you know, that first part of June, and then it has really skyrocketed since then. Which is indicative this time of year of getting out of some of the green up stage and you know, losing that that green up portion, and then those fuels become part of the available fuels for the ERC calculation, and those values will tend to climb. Next slide, please. So looking at Laramie, a little bit further to the west, similar scenario there of significant increases in their ERCs, and hopefully that portion of the state will get some of the moisture that they're hoping on. provide them at least some short-term relief. And then these charts too, just for kind of a reference of what we were looking at before with the colored dots, is this factors in multiple remote automated weather stations. So it's a little bit more of an averaging of those stations. So it kind of excludes some of the just localized, anomalies maybe that may occur of a drainage gets, higher precipitation or less than another area. So there's a little more averaging that go into these. Next slide, please. And then we'll look at kind of the opposite end of the spectrum. A lot has been mentioned about how much precipitation has occurred in that portion of the state, and so they are well below average right now on their energy release component. Their 1,000-hour field moistures are much higher than usual, so they're sitting in really good shape. And we'll see, depending on timing of moisture in the coming weeks to a month, see how low they stay, and see where that goes the rest of the summer. And some of the next graphics will kind of play into that. Next slide, please. So now we'll get into some of the outlooks. I've got tied into here, looking at June on the left side of your screen. So portions of the state are in that. The red, just the red in general, is above average potential for wildfires. And so definitely some areas that are in that vicinity of creeping up into the potential for being busy here in June, but June is going to be coming to a close soon. These are put out monthly, so we're kind of, this timing of this call is kind of in the middle of where these outlooks were released for. On the right side, looking into that next month here for July, a lot of that potential is really increasing through quite a bit of Wyoming, including, Yellowstone National Park. Some of that stuff I imagine will be altered on the next outlook that's get pushed out after what they've had for precip up there. So I would anticipate some of those areas to at least see some relief, and hopefully at least drop down into the more average values in there. But definitely over most of the state, we're going to be seeing that increase going into the next month. Next slide. And then just after, based on a question from last month, I just figured I'd include the next month as well, of what they're anticipating in August. So once again, why does that matter? And the big portion of that is if Wyoming is experiencing, a higher level of initial attack for suppression plus large fires, and we've got large fires in California, Oregon, and Washington, including Montana and the like, resource shortages really start to become a concern. Right now, there is definitely some activity nationally in the Southwest, but it really isn't strapping resources to a critical point like things happened last summer, very early on with the activity that occurred in Montana, starting out very early for their season and then progressing out into further into the west of California and Oregon also. So that kind of hopefully paints a little bit of a picture of what's kind of the expectation is out there. Obviously this doesn't say there's going to be fires, but this kind of shows that potential is there if that ignition does occur. So that's all I have. Thank you, Wendy.
Great, thank you, Joel. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Tony Bergantino to talk about how you can get involved. Tony, it looks like you're muted.
I'm unmuted now, I think. All right, a quick recap here on the U.S. Drought Monitor. We saw some large improvements with recent precipitation, along with some increased soil moisture. Southern part of the state, however, is seeing worsening soil moisture, and with the outlooks for the next 3 months or so, looking for likely above average temperatures and leaning toward more below normal precipitation. We'll have to keep a close watch on conditions, especially down there in the south. So with that, I'd like to talk a little bit about what you can do to help. And if you go to the next slide, I'll highlight 2 programs where you can let us know what you're experiencing. The more input we receive from around the state on the conditions and impacts, the more accurate the U.S. Drought Monitor can be. And the first of those is the Condition Monitoring Observer Reports, or CMOR system. The URL is highlighted on the slide there in yellow there. And here you can submit a report detailing what you're seeing in terms of impacts in your area, variety of categories, such as crops, livestock, fire, surface, you can see across the top there. And you can also include some photographs, which we'll see on the next slide. And while a single photo does kind of show what the current conditions are, it doesn't really tell us in absolute what's going on. It just shows what's going on at the moment. So it's really helpful if you can submit a photo of what would be considered normal conditions or some other conditions to give an idea of what the comparison is. And the photos that are uploaded to this site are publicly available, so just keep that in mind when you're uploading. If you go to the next one, the other way you can help is to become a COCORAS observer. And while you can also send in the condition reports through this system was originally set up so we could get a really good idea of the differences in precipitation over real short distances. And observers are given a 4-inch diameter rain gauge, and they can submit their precipitation readings online each morning. And we do encourage that you submit zeros, because a zero is just as valid a number as any other, especially when we're looking at trying to quantify drought. And so that zero lets us know for certain that precipitation did not fall at your location. And we'll never assume that no report means there was nothing to report, it's just that there's nothing there. The map on the left has the observations that were reported this morning. You can see all of those are zeros. A lot of people putting their zeros in, which is good. Not good that they're zero down, in especially the south, but at least they're being input. And the map on the right shows the number of observers who've been active in the last year or two. And you can see there's quite a few more dots on that map than there are on the one on the lower left. So we'd encourage people to sign up, because maybe some of these people who have just sort of dropped off the system have run their course, and we need to get new observers out there. And also you can see there's a lot of open spaces on that map where there's no observers. Now, being Wyoming, there's a lot of places where nobody lives, so we're always gonna have those holes, but we'd like to get as many as possible on there to fill in those gaps. Especially Uinta County seems to be a perennial empty spot, so it'd be good if you know any observers down there to have them sign up, and they can do so either at the COCORAS URL that's up there in the upper right, or they can get a hold of me. My contact will be on the last slide, and we can get you set up to observe and to report your conditions. And we go to the next slide. And that'll conclude this webinar. I'll thank all of our participants, and thank you for standing by our technical difficulties there at the beginning. And you can see the contact information for all of us involved there. And if you have any further questions that you do not want to ask here, you can always contact any of us on the slide. But with that, I will turn it back over to Wendy, and she can run the Q&A.
Great, thank you, Tony. And yes, again, thanks to all the presenters as well as the attendees, and thanks for your patience as we have the technical difficulties. We did have a request come in from someone that asked us to put the contact information back up for the calls from SEO. So I'm just pausing for a second on this last slide, and then I'll move back up to that slide here in just a moment. I'm also going to check to see if any questions came in through the Q&A. So I don't see any in the Q&A. A question was asked in advance, so I'll go ahead and ask it, and then I'll switch to that slide for the contact information with SEO. There is a question regarding for the State Engineer's Office, so for Jeff, to explain how the water calls work, and you referenced territorial and the different priority dates. If you wouldn't mind explaining that, and I'll move to the slide with the contact information.
Sure, no problem, Wendy. When someone comes into a state engineer's office, because we have many offices around the state, they'll place a call on whatever creek or whatever river they're on. First off, they have to have a measurable and lockable head gate in order to make a call. That's a detail we won't worry about right now. But if they make a call and because their water right is not being supplied by the creek, and they assume someone upstream of them may be diverting more than they're allowed, so they're shorted water. So they sign that call in our office. And just to pick a date, their water right is 1882, a territorial right, which the territorial right is a right that occurred before Wyoming was a state. After that, we had rules in place where you had to get a permit and a whole different process for getting those water rights. So if you have an 1882 water right for 5 CFS and they go to the head gate and there is 2 CFS at the river at your head gate, then they would go upstream of you to whoever is last in line. So whoever has the youngest priority date, and they start turning them off if they're diverting. So if that's an 1882 call, they may only have to go to the first right above you and say it's a 2000 water right. They shut them off. That then gets 5 CFS to the head gate. They're done. If that's not the case, they keep going upstream to the next ditch. If it's younger than you, they would shut it off. If it's older than you, they leave it on, and they just keep going until the whatever the next head gate they shut off would then provide those 5 CFS to your head gate, fulfilling your water rights. So some of those calls were to whatever the priority date of the right is, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they've had to shut everyone off to that date. That's just where they start, going with that youngest water right above you and working their way up until the proper amount shows up at your head gate.
Great. Thank you, Jeff.
Sure.
And I'll leave this slide up for another second or so. I do see another question came in. So the question is about how somebody can access or review the presentation, and will there be a link posted to the recorded presentation? And if technology cooperates after the presentation, yes, we do record and post the webinar recording, as well as a PDF of the slide deck on the Wyoming Drought Information and Resources website. And I'll try to grab that website and drop it in the chat. And actually, I'll go to the last slide because it should be in there. And this question has come up a couple of times. And so I will also send an email out in the next day or two, just reminding folks that we're invited, where you can find the recording once it's posted. So here's that website, drought.wyo.gov. And on the website towards the top, there's an option, a webinars option. So we'll post it there. Below the recording is a hyperlink to the PDF. It's just the words you'll see there. So you can access them in their entirety. It'll take sometimes about 24 hours to get posted. So you might check back tomorrow morning and see if it's there, if it's not there by 5 o'clock today. And again, hoping technology works for us. I do have that it's just after 2 o'clock. So with that, feel free to log off. And we want to thank you again for joining us today. And we look forward to connecting with everyone again next month. So thank you, everyone.